Chapter 9. Pain and its mental conquest. It appears from the sayings of Jesus that he possessed the keys of death and Hades, or that he had attained to a perfect control of the life of the body, so that death was a voluntary surrender on his part and not a conquest. He says, "You therefore does my Father love me, because I lay down, or give up, my life, that I may take it again. No one taketh it away from me, but I lay it down myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment, or instruction, received I from my Father." John 10 verses 17 and 18. To some extent, at least, if not in the fullness of the power possessed by Jesus, it is an attainable condition, far more so than the world at large has been educated to believe. There have been men in the world who have possessed the control of the life of the body to such a degree that they lived as long as they desired to live. Death had no more dominion over them, for they were not under law, that is, the controlling influence of public opinion, but under grace, or the hidden spiritual wisdom. Romans 6 verses 8 to 14. This control of the life of the body was one of the objects of quest by the alchemists, and it is believed that some of them attained to it. And there are intelligent people who believe that there are today men on earth, the years of whose life are very far from being bounded by a single century. In reference to this, we neither affirm nor deny. Before we wholly reject it as absurd, incredible, and impossible, we do well to pause and ask, is it in harmony with the teaching of Jesus and of Christianity? Is man's present condition the utmost limit of his powers? Has human nature attained to its full spiritual growth? If there are any uninvolved possibilities in man, then we may rise to and bring forth something higher. A brief half-century ago, few would have deemed it possible that two men could intelligibly communicate with each other across the Atlantic Ocean, or talk with each other 100 miles apart. For such an achievement would have been considered as impossible as to fly to the moon. Life is manifested on three distinct or discrete planes of existence, and the higher, in accordance with the divine order, may govern the lower. It is a law of our being, established and perpetuated by an everywhere present deity, that spirit should dominate all the physical functions. Jesus affirms, "He that liveth and believeth in me shall never die." John 11 verse 26. Again, he who believeth on the Son, which includes our own inward divine spirit, hath everlasting life, as a present attainment. John 3 verse 16. These and similar passages manifestly mean more than the popular religion of the day finds in them. It is predicted by the best of the Jewish prophets that in the Messianic age that was to be born, the life of man would be greatly prolonged, for as the days of a tree shall be the days of my people. Isaiah 65 verses 20 to 22. But it is our purpose to speak more particularly of pain and its mental remedy. In that higher condition of man, which is called the new heavens and the new earth, and which is nothing but the attainment of a truly spiritual and celestial state, and its ultimate expression in the body, it is said there shall be no more pain. Revelation 21 verse 4. Pain and disease are the result of the fall of man, or the lapse of humanity from the plane of the spiritual life to a state of bondage to matter and the lower senses. And the cure must consist in the surrender of the lower animal soul to the rightful dominion of the Spirit, the Christ within, who must be allowed to reign in us until every enemy is put under his feet, and the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. When we attain the true Christian position of thought, and death becomes transformed into resurrection, or the ascent of the soul to a new and higher life on earth, then pain and disease disappear from consciousness. The soul is, as it were, separated from the body, that is, it is freed from the limitations of matter and released from its corporeal dungeon. When the Christ within us, the immortal and divine Spirit in us, sheds its living radiance upon all the lower or outer departments of our being, then the immortal life animates our clay. And the vivifying breath of God moves the physiological machinery in harmony with all that is divine in nature. This is the coming of the Christ in the flesh and in our flesh. It is the Lord, the one life, and one thing needful, coming to his temple, a purified human body, and coming the prisoner to release long held in the bondage of matter, and to open the prison to all that within us which is bound. It is the advent of the Logos, the inner and living Word, the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world, and this light is the life of man, and this Word is made flesh, or is intimated in a bodily expression in harmony with it, and dwells in us, which is the true rendering, not among us, as if it was something outside of us and foreign to our true being. John 1 verse 14. In this resurrection day, the real man, the immortal self, comes forth from the sepulchre of the body and lives eternal life while on earth. The various anesthetics afford insensibility to the pains of disease and of surgical operations by temporarily releasing the soul from the body, a condition of existence which is attainable as a philosophical and religious state without the use of drugs, as the Hindu soma drink, or the more modern nitrous oxide. Says Sir Humphrey Davy, the English chemist, in describing his sensations after inhaling the gas, I began to respire 20 quarts of unmingled nitrous oxide. A thrilling extending from the chest to the extremities was almost immediately produced. I felt a sense of tangible extension highly pleasurable in every limb. My visible impressions were dazzling and apparently magnified. I heard distinctly every sound in the room and was perfectly aware of my situation. By degrees, as the pleasurable sensations increased, I lost all connection with external things. Trains of vivid visible images rapidly passed through my mind and were connected with words in such a manner as to produce perceptions perfectly novel. I existed in a world of newly connected and newly modified ideas. I theorized. I imagined that I made discoveries. When I was awakened from this semi-delirious trance by Dr. Kinglake, who took the bag from my mouth, indignation and pride were the first feelings produced by the sight of the persons about me. My emotions were enthusiastic and sublime, and for a minute I walked around the room, perfectly regardless of what was said to me. As I recovered my former state of mind, I felt an inclination to communicate the discoveries I had made during the experiment. I endeavored to recall the ideas. They were feeble and indistinct. One collection of terms, however, presented itself, and with the most intense belief and prophetic manner, I exclaimed to Dr. Kinglake, "Nothing exists but thoughts. The universe is composed of impressions, ideas, pleasures, and pains." About 3 minutes and a half only had elapsed during this experiment, though the time, as measured by the relative vividness of the collected ideas, appeared to me much longer. This emancipation of the soul from the limitations of the body and the bondage of the inner man to the external senses, which gives us the mastery of pain and disease, affected in an abnormal way by the use of anesthetics, and which transformed the materialistic scientist and chemist into an idealistic philosopher temporarily, is a state into which mankind can be educated or developed. It is among the unevolved potentialities of our nature. It is a permanent, religious, and philosophical state which has been realized in the experience of the few, who have appeared occasionally along the path of human history as pioneers and heralds of a better day for the world. They are signals sparsely set along the battlements of heaven, flashing into the solid darkness of the world. The good news, the kingdom of the heavens is at hand. This state of emancipation from the body, and the deceptive and erroneous appearances and illusions of the senses, is the same as the Neoplatonic ecstasy, which was deemed necessary to the attainment of the highest philosophical and spiritual altitude of thought and life. Our bondage to the animal senses, which is the taste of that forbidden tree that brought death and disease and pain and all our woe into the world, is an inverted, unnatural, and may we not say, ungodly, condition. And who shall deliver us from the body of this death? In the language of Paul, who found the way, I thank God, through our Lord Jesus Christ, who is within us as the hidden center of our being. Pain and disease are not necessities of our earthly existence. There is a way out. He who has found the Christ within, his own immortal spirit, an emanation from the supreme and universal spirit, and which partakes of all the attributes and perfections of its parent source, can say, I am the first and the last, and the one who lives. And I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. To open the door and walk out into God's great sunlight. Ezekiel 1:17-18. The present movement of the public mind in the direction of the cure of disease and sin, in the Platonic sense of an error of the understanding, must be received by all thinking people as one of the most important movements in philosophy and religion which modern history has been called upon to record. It is the first feeble shaking of the dry bones of the past golden age of the world, buried beneath the sensuous materialistic science of modern times, and which is now struggling into a resurrection. I discover in it the pulse-beats of a higher life in humanity. Like primitive Christianity, there will be much that will try to fasten itself upon it that has no vital connection with it, and it will be opposed by the modern scribes, or lettermen of the law, and by a narrow, Pharisaic bigotry. And even Herod may seek to slay the young child, but nevertheless the infant is fully born, like Minerva or wisdom, from the brain of Jupiter, and the child will increase in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and men. But let us bear in mind that the movement, if it signifies anything of a permanent value to the world, means a higher development of the spiritual life of man. It is only in this way that we can ever hope to attain to the mastery of pain and disease by the mind or thinking principle, in the dethronement of the bodily senses, in the establishment of the empire of the Spirit in us, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all other dominions must serve and obey it. The overthrow of the fourth kingdom of Daniel, the Iron Age of Greek and Roman mythology, and which marks the reign in us of materialism and sensualism and religion and science, is accomplished by the mystic stone, cut without hands from the mountain, the symbol of the celestial degree of life, and which is identical with the white stone of the Apocalypse and the philosopher's stone of the alchemists, and this, as Trithemius affirms, is none other than our own immortal and divine Spirit. In the language of Paul, when correctly rendered, great is the mystery of godliness which is manifested in the flesh. 1 Timothy 3 verse 16. In an old definition of pain, which dates as far back as Aristotle, and which has been reproduced by Sir William Hamilton and adopted into his metaphysical system, we have a hint for the application of what will prove in very many cases an infallible remedy for it, and one of which we should never lose sight. It is a remedy we shall have frequent occasion to prescribe for ourselves and others. Says Hamilton, pleasure is a reflex, that is, effect, result, of the spontaneous and unimpeded exertion of a power of which we are conscious. Pain, a reflex of the overstrained or repressed exertion of such a power. Lectures on Metaphysics, page 577. Here is a golden truth of great practical value. If we substitute for pleasure and pain the words health and disease, it is equally true. Most diseases and painful affections, so far as they have become a condition of the physical organism, are a stasis or standing still of the circulation both of the blood and of the soul principle through the parts. To put any organ or muscle, as an arm or a leg, to its legitimate, not overstrained, use is always pleasurable and healthful. Most diseases are the result of a repressed or obstructed activity of some part of the body. To find out the divinest use of any power of mind or body, and to put it to that use, is the law of its health and the sovereign remedy for its disease. Take as an illustration the lameness and soreness of the muscles of the arm, especially the deltoid muscle, whose office is to raise the arm. The pain here is only a crying out of the part for more blood, more soul life. Each successive time the arm is slowly raised, the pain is less and less, until at length it wholly disappears. The same is true of that most painful disease, acute or chronic inflammation of the sciatic nerve, or the ordinary forms of rheumatism. In the former case, the sciatic nerve, one of the largest in the body, has become strangulated, as some medical author expresses it. It cries out for more of the soul life in it. Gently move it a few times, and then arise, take up thy bed, and walk. Soreness and pain in a part of the body, to speak after the manner of men, are only the same thing in different degrees, a one of life in the part. And the voluntary movement of a part determines the vital force to the part moved. A weak muscle is always sore. Action is the law of life, and consequently of health. Inaction is first pain, and then death. He who fully comprehends this principle and can bring the patient to a practical application of it will be a successful physician. For the cure of disease is only the restoration of the organs involved in it to their legitimate functional use and activity. During the last quarter of a century, by an application of this principle, I have wrought many miracles in the popular estimation, and a large proportion of the marvels of healing witnessed at the present time are illustrations of the principle we are discussing in this article. The better way is to educate the patient into the application of this principle, and then he works his own miracles, and in a spirit of self-reliance, becomes his own thaumaturgist. In Swedenborg's grand science of correspondence, to move signifies to live. Arcana Celestia, 5605. Life is a force, and all force is a form of motion. The movements of the body, both voluntary and involuntary, originate in the soul, and are only modifications of the life of the soul. If your arm is lame, it is because life is retreating from it. Therefore follow the prescription of Jesus, stretch forth thine arm. For the motion of the limb will determine an influx of the universal life into it. For as motion is life, so immobility is disease and death. Act in the living present, heart within, and God overhead. Let us, then, be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. That state of consciousness which we denominate pain is not in the material body. Its location there is an illusion and a false belief. Pain, like everything in nature and in the human body, has a mental side to it. It corresponds to something in the mind, which is the cause of it. If we can find this mental or spiritual root of it, from which it arises, and without which it cannot exist, and can remove it, we cure it. To aid us in doing this, we would observe that there are three classes of sensations, which include all our possible sensational experiences. In the first place is that large class of sensations which may with propriety be denominated indifferent sensations, because our mental attitude toward them is one of indifference. We do not care whether they go or stay. We have neither desire for them nor aversion toward them. They are consequently neither pleasurable nor painful. For this cause they are out of consciousness most of the time. We become conscious of them only by a special act of attention to them, such as the feeling of the air on the surface of the body when it is neither too warm nor too cold. Such also is the sensation occasioned by the contact of our clothing with the skin. The larger portion of our sensations belongs to this class. Our mental state in relation to them is one of indifference, an equilibrium of desire and aversion which we call contentment. There is another class of sensations which we denominate pleasurable. The pleasure may exist in 1,000 different degrees of intensity, all depending upon our varying mental states in reference to them. Our mental attitude towards this class of sensible experiences is not one of indifference or neutrality, but of desire. We like them and cherish them. It is to be observed that the more of this desire we have, the more intense is the sensation of pleasure. For the pleasure, when we get round to the spiritual side of it, is nothing but desire, and the pleasure cannot exist without the desire. As a familiar illustration of this general principle in the philosophy of human nature, we know that the more thirsty we are, that is, the more we desire water, the more pleasure we experience in drinking it. Without the thirst in some degree, there is no pleasure in drinking the purest water on earth. The more hungry a man is, that is, the more intense his desire for food, the better his food tastes to him. Without appetite, which is only a name for desire, the richest viands afford no pleasure in the eating. Desire is the ground of all pleasurable sensations. This is the reason why the same thing may be pleasurable to one person and painful or unpleasant to another. It is owing to the difference in the feelings or mental attitude of the two persons toward it. The one likes it, the other dislikes it, which are only other names for desire and aversion. What is pleasurable to us at one time may be unpleasant or painful to us at another time, from the law of sympathy and antipathy, or desire and aversion. There is another class of sensations, which we designate pain. The pain may exist in 1,000 degrees of vividness or intensity. The too great sourness of an orange or an apple is pain. Anything we dislike is painful to us, and in exact proportion to the degree in which we dislike it. Our mental attitude towards this class of sensations is not one of indifference, as in the first class, nor of desire, as in the second, but of aversion, and oftentimes an impatient haste to be rid of them. We consider it a fixed principle, as immutable as any law of geometry, that the more of this aversion and impatience we feel, the more intense is the pain. The one is the exact measure of the other. The pain on the spiritual side of it is nothing but this feeling of aversion and impatient haste to be delivered from the sensation. If we can bring ourselves to feel that the pain is not an evil, but good, and that all good is desirable and delightful, and remove from our minds the repugnance to it, and replace it by a state of perfect patience and tranquil endurance, the pain will subside and finally cease. Swedenborg defines pain to be a feeling of repugnance arising from interior forces, for that which is repugnant to us is painful. Apocalypse Revealed, 697. In its spiritual essence, pain is a feeling of repugnance, and the aversion we feel toward it arises from a misapprehension of its nature and use. It springs from our falsely viewing it as an evil, whereas it is always a good. The correction of this deep-seated delusion is the cure of it. All men love and desire what is good, and we cannot avoid this, for it belongs to our nature. And what we love and desire affords us delight, and never pain. If we can remove from our mind the aversion to what we call pain, under the mistaken notion that it is an evil, the pain will go with the aversion out of our consciousness. There is not a law of nature or mind more certain in its operation than this. Pain is caused by our interfering with and obstructing the optimism of nature. The divine life in the world, and in the human body, always works in the direction of our supreme good. And when we can say, not as a prayer for something we have not, but as a state into which we have entered, Thy kingdom come, and Thy will be clone in earth, or in the material body, as it is done in heaven, our pain will cease. If the pain we feel, as that of a boil, is a good thing, and it certainly is not an evil or a disease, but an effort of nature towards the renewal of our life, then by viewing it as such, and laying aside our aversion or repugnance to it, and our impatience and the divergence of our will from the supreme will, it will change the nature of it. For all good is pleasant to us. In regard to any painful disease, when we perceive and affirm that what occasions the pain is not an evil, but a good, and when by the light of the supreme knowledge which dispels all our illusions and sensuous fallacies, we view it as a good, our repugnance or aversion to it ceases, and as that is the causal source of the pain, that also disappears from consciousness. For an effect must cease on the removal of its cause. The principles of this chapter will stand the test of experiment. I have known persons in the deepest agony to find immediate and permanent relief by an application of them. Let us remember that our real self, the spirit of man, is included in the divine being, and into this great habitation never tear or sorrow came. What we call pain is an illusion. It is a positive good, and all good is delightful. When we view things in the light of the supreme truth, or as the divine mind views them, and bring our will into line with the will that creates and governs all, our pains and petty sorrows fall off, like drops of rain from a lotus leaf. In eternal rest, a solid and enduring peace closes round the soul of him who dwells in God. The sensual principle, says Swedenborg, is the ultimate of the life of man's mind, adhering and cohering to the 5 bodily senses. The principle of sense is designed to be entirely subservient and obedient to the intellectual principle. It is influenced and governed by thought and is in fact a mode of thought. There is a sensus communis, a common sense, a universal principle of sensation, in which all particular sensation subsists. Thought directed to a part, as in the act of attention, causes a concentration of this principle to the part and intensifies sensation and occasions an increased consciousness of pain. To put a sensation of either pleasure or pain out of thought is to remove it wholly from consciousness. The word sense is derived from the Latin sensus, which is the passive participle of the verb sentio, which means not only to feel, but also to think. Sensation means that which is thought, as idea means what is seen or known. Sensation is a mode of thought, and whether it be a pain or a pleasure depends upon how we think and feel in regard to it. If, as we said before, we think it an evil and consequently feel a repugnance toward it, this sensation will and must be a pain. If we think it a good and feel no repugnance to it, then it will not be a pain. End of chapter.